Welcome to the AHC podcast. Join us in conversation with experts, thought leaders and colourful characters in the hairdressing industry and beyond. We'll be discussing stories and ideas to inspire, educate and entertain you, and most importantly, to help grow your business. If you'd like to listen to more AHC podcasts, you can find them on Spotify or Apple under the Australian Hairdressing Council. Are you ready? Let's do this.
Hi everyone, it's Sandy Chong here from the Australian Hairdressing Council, and I've got Kelly Cunningham from Your Leasing Co to have a chat about, well, where are we now when it comes to leasing and our landlords? We've gone through the last 3 years of a pandemic, and in fact, we're really in our fourth. And even though we are post-pandemic, I think we'd all agree that for many of our businesses, there are times that we couldn't even open because we would have staff off on personal leave. So what does this mean, though, when it comes to our leasing and our landlords and, what's happening right now in leasing land? I'm going to pass over to Kelly because she's the girl with all the knowledge that I don't have, and she's amazing. And so, Kelly, let's have a chat about, well, we're post-pandemic, supposedly. Where does this leave us now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it, when people say it's post-pandemic and it's back to business as usual. And I sort of argue that it's not necessarily back to usual, because usual might be pre-COVID, but it's more like things are becoming a bit more routine now and a bit more regular and a bit more consistent, which is easier to manage, going forward. But there certainly are some things that COVID has left us with that we now need to be mindful of when we're negotiating a lease. The first thing we talk about is the rent on the tenancies. So nearly every retail tenancy rent has come down during the course of the last few years, mainly because there just isn't the lineup of people waiting to lease space at the moment. There's obviously a whole bunch of businesses who didn't make it at the other end of the pandemic, and that's created a bunch of vacancy. And the supply and demand equation would result in the fact that we've got more tenancies available than we do have tenants. So therefore, the rents have come down. So people have been enjoying an increase, and the rents continue to increase. And now, if you've got an opportunity to renegotiate your lease, if your lease is expiring, then it's an opportunity to align your rent back to the market. And what is the market value of your tenancy today, which will be less than what it was at the end of the lease now, right? Because your lease now is purely as a result of the calculation over 5 years, not necessarily what reflects the market today. So that's the first thing. The second thing is rent review mechanisms. Historically, CPI has been used as the thing that's the most sort of in line with what's going on in the general environment. And it's been sitting at sort of 2 or 3%, and that's okay. At the moment, in all states of Australia, CPI is sitting at over 8%. So, if you've got a lease with CPI rent reviews, you're getting smashed, because 8% is just enormous to have an increase. And if you've got a big rent, that's a big increase. And we've got a client who's got CPI plus 2.5, so it's 10.5%. And that's not uncommon, and especially in some of the institutional leases. So it's important when you're renegotiating a lease that you take out any reference to CPI, even though CPI will ultimately come back at some point. I don't foresee that happening in the next 2 or 3 years. Might to get back to 2% might be some time. So trying to look for a 3% review or a 4% fixed review is a much more favourable outcome. And it's also easier to manage because you know exactly what it's going to look like in the coming years. Now, one of the things that you touched on a minute ago, Sandy, was just with regard to the staff shortages and things. And that's obviously a gift that COVID has left us, which is, that there's just not the internationals coming in, and there's just less people around, and there's lowest unemployment rate, for a long, long time. Now, what that means is sometimes we're not able to open our businesses because we just simply don't have the staff to do the appointments. And there are some leases around, especially, as I said, in the big shopping centre leases, like institutional landlords often have clauses in the lease to say that you must open the core trading hours of the centre every day, including Thursday nights and, all day Sunday, etc. And if you don't open the core trading hours, we can fine you $100 per hour. So it's important that you're in one of those environments in a large shopping centre, and you have a clause like, firstly, look to see if you have a clause like that in your lease, because a lot of people don't even realise they have it. And if they do, then that's something you definitely want to negotiate out. when you're renegotiating your lease. And really, finally, it's just important to keep across with the landlord what's happening in your business. If you are having issues with staff, which is resulting in a downturn in sales, they may have some visibility of that because they can see your sales report, reporting monthly, and they may see some kind of, downturn or things. But often what people do is they struggle through and they beg, borrow and steal to make sure they can get the rent paid. And don't talk to the landlord about it. And then when they do need to do that, the landlord's kind of in a bit of shock saying, hang on a second, but you guys have been fine. Like, I'm not following. Are you sure that's true? Are you trying to, stitch me up? What is the story? Because you guys have been fine. Why are you all of a sudden having trouble? When it's not all of a sudden, it's just that you've been managing it up until now and you get to a point where you can't do that anymore. So it's important to just keep those communication lines open with your landlord and make sure that even though you're saying, look, I'm not asking for help now, I'm just letting you know that this is something that we're struggling with. It's a challenge for our business, and I may need your help in the future, just so that they have some visibility of it and they're more likely to be more cooperative when you do go to them and say, hey, remember we spoke about this? That's actually eventuating at the moment and we're really struggling. Is there anything you can do to help? And they'll be more open to that conversation about some rent-free or some more marketing assistance or things like that, which they can help with, because they get very suspicious when everybody's been going along nicely and then all of a sudden they ask for rent relief because something's not right. They think, hang on, this is a stitch-up, what's the story? And it's often not. It's just because people have been too proud sometimes to sort of put their hand up and say, hey, I do need help. And landlords are expecting those calls. So don't feel any sort of shame attached to that, because that's what they're there for. They're working in partnership with you. So yeah, that would be my sort of tips now, making or checking in on your rent to make sure it's in line with the market and getting it to market if you can. Reviews, not CPI, stay away from that. Keep them at 3 or 4. Removing the penalties for not opening, and just keeping those lines of communication open with your landlord. Yeah.
As always, Kelly, really good tips. And I know that you've mentioned negotiating with your landlords, but really for anyone who is negotiating a lease full stop, whether it's a new lease or whether it's an existing lease, really, we highly recommend that they go to Kelly at Your Leasing Co and get them to negotiate. I think I've said to you before, Kelly, I had really horrible landlords that were really mean and they were really awful and they were impossible to negotiate with. And so, it just takes all that angst away. And I would much rather have someone like you, on my side and fighting for my business. But great tips about the CPI clauses and also, the shopping centre clauses when you're not open 7 days a week. I think one thing that I should mention, if for anyone who is listening who's a member of the Australian Hairdressing Council, make sure that you get your lease registered with Kelly Cunningham at Your Leasing Co. She'll cast her eyes over it, and when your lease is due, then she'll be able to advise what you can do, what you should do, what you need to do when it comes to your new lease. In fact, any lease, Kelly, what I've learned is Kelly should be looking over them. You've saved our members literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, and during the pandemic, you were amazing. And so I don't think anyone should move forward with a lease without consulting with you. So thank you again for your time and your tips. You're always amazing.
Thanks, Andy. No problem.